Darren Thompson's eyes felt like sandpaper. He'd been on the road since dawn, and now as midnight approached, every muscle ached with exhaustion. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic slap of the wipers against the windshield were a lullaby threatening to pull him under. The road ahead was dark and glossy with rain, winding through the dense pines that crowded the edges of the asphalt like silent sentinels. He was close to home, just another 40 miles or so, but those 40 miles felt like a lifetime. It had been a long week, sales calls all up and down the coast, the same monotonous pitches, the same tired smiles. It all blurred together, and by the end of it, he was running on fumes. He'd thought about getting a room somewhere, but it was so much nicer to just keep going, to keep pressing forward. He could already imagine the familiar creak of the front door, the smell of Emily's lavender-scented candles, the way his own bed would embrace him like a long-lost friend. The rain started as a drizzle, soft pinpricks against the windshield. He blinked hard, trying to keep his vision clear, but the world was going fuzzy at the edges. He cranked up the volume on the radio, hoping the pulsing beat of a country ballad would keep him awake. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel, the lever cold and rough against his skin. The drizzle turned into a downpour. Sheets of rain cascaded down, transforming the road into a winding river of water and shadows. The tires hissed over the wet pavement, and every curve felt like a gamble. Darren leaned forward, squinting as the headlights struggled to cut through the downpour. His eyelids were heavy, laden weights that he had to fight to keep open. A curve came up fast, sharper than he remembered. The steering wheel jerked in his hands as he overreacted, the car skidding dangerously close to the shoulder before he managed to regain control. His heart hammered in his chest, jolted awake by the adrenaline. "Get it together," he muttered, his voice rough and tired. He smacked his cheeks, trying to wake himself up, trying to shake off the drowsiness that clung to him like fog. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He glanced over and saw Emily's name flash across the screen. Probably checking to see how close he was. Probably worried, knowing how long he'd been driving. He reached for the phone, his fingers brushing the smooth surface, but as his eyes left the road, the car veered again, this time into the oncoming lane. Blinding headlights filled his vision, a horn blaring loud and urgent. Darren's heart seized as he wrenched the steering wheel to the right. The car lurched back into his lane, tires skimming the edge of the shoulder, gravel spitting up and rattling against the undercarriage. The other car flew past, its red taillights glowing like demon eyes in the darkness. Darren's chest heaved, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could still hear the echo of the horn, feel the rush of wind as the vehicles had nearly collided. His hands trembled on the wheel. He was wide awake now, fear electrifying his nerves. He took a deep breath, then another, trying to steady himself. He looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror, his face pale and drawn, eyes wide and haunted. The rain was relentless, pouring in heavy sheets that danced in the high beams. The road wound like a serpent, curves that seemed to come out of nowhere, slick with water and fallen leaves. Darren's knuckles were white as he gripped the wheel, every muscle taut with tension. The fatigue came creeping back, more insidious this time, weaving its way through his limbs, making his body feel sluggish and heavy. He shook his head, forcing his eyes to focus, forcing himself to stay alert. Just 30 more miles, just a little further. He flicked the radio to a talk station, the voice of an animated DJ filling the car, but the words were just noise, indistinct and distant, fading into the hum of the engine and the drumming rain. The windshield wipers kept time, back and forth, hypnotic and soothing. Another curve, another overcorrection. The tires slid on the wet pavement, the car fishtailing before finding traction again. Darren's heart raced, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He was losing control, losing his grip on reality, slipping in and out of consciousness. Stay awake, stay awake. He said it over and over, a mantra to keep himself grounded. He turned the air conditioning to full blast, icy air blasting his face. It helped a little, but the road kept winding, twisting. The rain kept falling, heavier now, a torrential downpour that turned the world into a swirling blur of darkness and water. He thought of Emily, waiting up for him, probably watching the clock, worrying. He thought of the way she always curled up on the couch with a blanket, her fingers playing with the frayed edges when she was anxious. The thought of her, so close and yet so far, kept him going, kept him fighting to stay awake, to stay alive. The car strayed into the opposite lane again. Another horn, another blinding flash of headlights. Darren swerved, barely avoiding a collision, his chest tight with panic. He was running out of luck, running out of time. The rain came down harder, a roaring deluge that drowned out all other sounds. The world was water and darkness, the road a slick ribbon twisting beneath him. His head bobbed, sleep trying to pull him under, trying to drag him down. He slapped himself again, harder this time, the sting of pain jolting him awake. 20 miles, 10. He was getting closer, but every mile felt like an eternity. The road straightened out, the curves leveling into long stretches of black pavement. He pressed down on the gas, the car surging forward, faster now, reckless and desperate. His vision was swimming, his head heavy. He could see the outline of familiar landmarks, the old barn on the right, the gas station with the broken neon sign. Home was just a few minutes away, just a few more miles. The rain began to let up, the downpour easing into a steady drizzle. Darren blinked, his eyes gritty and raw, the road finally coming into focus. He saw a street sign, the familiar letters glowing faintly in the darkness. Relief washed over him, his body sagging as he turned onto the quiet neighborhood road. His house appeared at the end of the cul-de-sac, lights on in the window. Emily was waiting for him, just as he'd known she would be. The sight of home, of that warm glow, was enough to push him through the final stretch. He pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching over wet gravel. He turned off the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening. For a moment, he just sat there, his head resting against the steering wheel, eyes closed as the exhaustion crashed over him. The front door opened, and Emily appeared on the porch, her silhouette framed by the soft light behind her. He forced himself out of the car, his legs weak and unsteady, his body heavy with fatigue. She hurried down the steps, her arms wrapping around him, holding him tight. "You made it," she whispered, her voice breaking with relief. "I was so worried." Darren held her close, his face buried in her hair, the familiar scent of lavender calming his racing heart. He didn't tell her how close he'd come to never making it home, how many times he'd danced with death on those long winding roads. All that mattered was that he was here, safe and whole, wrapped in the warmth of her embrace. The long road home had nearly killed him, but he'd made it, and he wasn't letting go. Thanks for joining us on the open road, where anything can happen and there's always more adventures just right around the corner. Remember before you leave to like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time on the open road.